Hello, my name is Cameron Duncan. I'm director of photography of shows like Cobra Kai, Longmire, The Preacher, and Hot Zone. You're listening to The Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I'm a director and owner of BC Media Productions. And this is The Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. Today we're speaking with Cameron Duncan. He's a cinematographer of a whole bunch of shows that you know and love, like Cobra Kai, Preacher, Longmire, 13 Reasons Why, and so much more. And we're going to get to all of that with Cameron in just a couple of minutes. Actually, we have a pretty interesting discussion about split diopters and filming with everything in focus, really deep focus, and kind of the challenges that poses and how it can also be just a fun thing to try for yourself in your own work. So you'll certainly like that. But of course, we get into cameras and lenses and all the goodies and the tasty stuff that we get to on Go Creative Show every single week. I want to encourage you to follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And of course, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. All right, let's jump right in because there is so much to discuss with Cameron Duncan, director of photography. So I'm here with Cameron Duncan, director of photography and cinematographer of a whole bunch of shows that you know and love. 13 Reasons Why, Cobra Kai, Preacher, Hot Zone, Longmire, and so much more. And we're going to get to all of it with Cameron right now. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.
So I learned about your work through Cobra Kai, and I know you were involved in season 1. And I want to start there because Cobra Kai is one of those shows that just like all of a sudden people started talking about it. No one really knew they wanted to learn more about these characters from Karate Kid. You didn't know you cared until it was available. And then everyone's like, oh my God, I need to know what's going on with these characters. And it just is kind of one of those weird pop culture phenomenons that just come out of nowhere and take off. And I'd love to hear from your perspective kind of how you got involved in the show, how it was presented to you, and just, your impressions of where it ultimately went.
My agent brought it to me, and it was a previous producer I'd worked with on Queen of the South. So I think maybe a year prior, I had worked with this producer that was producing the show now. And when my agent said it's a show called Cobra Kai about the continuation of the Karate Kid, initially, I gotta say, I was slightly apprehensive. It sounded a bit cheesy. Or it could be cheesy, certainly. But who's not a fan of Karate Kid? Like anytime you're flipping through the TV and it's there, you can catch it midway, and I can get sucked into it. And it just reminds me so much of my youth and the classic style filmmaking that it garnered was just, I think they did some wonderful work on it. We tried to emulate some of it in the show. So I initially took the call because I was familiar with the producer and the AD that was going to be on it. And so that excited me to work with them again. And then as I read the pilot script, it was just phenomenal. I mean, it was hilarious. It was sad. I liked how they presented Johnny Lawrence. I mean, everything about it was just phenomenal. So I definitely was up for taking the meeting. And upon that, I went down to Sony to their office. And as soon as I walked in the doors, 3 guys, John Hurwitz, Hayden Schlossenberg, and Josh Shield, and the 3 of them have known each other for quite some time. But as soon as the door opens up, on the wall is this massive banner, Cobra Kai banner. And to me, right away, like, these are my kind of guys. Like, they're so dedicated and hardcore that they have a massive banner in their office. And so that just right away, I felt very at ease with them and comfortable. And I had a great interview.
When you're thinking about this series, what are you thinking like you personally can bring to it? Because it has such a developed aesthetic already with the original movies. Now coming back in 18, 19, whatever it was that you guys kind of started it out, and like bringing kind of that to a modern day, what is it from a cinematography standpoint, from a visual standpoint, that you want to bring to it to modernize it, but also pay homage to its original roots?
There's a lot of factors. Obviously, digital is such a significant part of our industry now. very few TV series are shot on film, and obviously Karate Kid was shot on film initially. So there's that aspect too. You got to throw that out the window. You're not going to shoot on film most likely unless the producers are pushing for it. So what I wanted to do was revisit the lenses that were used on the Karate Kid. And so I went to Panavision, which is where they used their gear originally, and talked to Dan Sasaki about the lenses that were used. And he was excited because he's a fan of the film too. So he got real excited about the idea of me wanting to replicate what they had shot with back in the day. And we essentially did that. We shot with Cook 5:1s, a Cook 10:1 zooms. And if you notice in the original Karate Kid, there's just fantastic zoom work that is done. And a lot of times there's a single shot, but it's all done with the zoom is used to create coverage, whether it's with the blocking, with the actors and the movement on the dolly and the zoom. So the director was very aware of how to utilize and be economic with that aesthetic back then. And so we tried to do some of that. It's tough in this day and age to not have too much pacing in the show, unless it's something that's, I think, brought to you by the showrunner.
What do you mean?
Because editorial, well, when you're working and you create ideas and concepts with a director for TV, you can execute, but that doesn't mean it's going to be in the final cut. So when that material goes to the editor wants to do some work to it, and then the showrunner will eventually get to do some work to it. So it can be, I don't want to say chopped up and butchered, but sometimes it can be. So if you try to do a 4-minute shot with zooms and dolly movement, and the only way you can kind of preserve that is if you don't do additional coverage, which is tough to kind of get away with, I think, in modern TV, because so many people want the ability to be flexible in post, which is, understandable. So I guess what I'm saying is that we didn't quite achieve what they had done in Karate Kid as far as the long, zoomy dolly moves. We did a few of them, but not a lot of them. But beyond that, the glass was very important in the decision making because I wanted to use those old zooms. But for the interior work, we also used old super speed size lenses, which were also on the original Karate Kid. So that was really important to me, is to for this nostalgic that we all are aware of when you watch Karate Kid. In order to do Cobra Kai, I didn't want to fall too far from the tree. I wanted to kind of embrace that aesthetic. And especially with the Johnny Lawrence character being somewhat stuck in the same place he was 30 years prior, and hasn't really evolved in a way that I wanted to kind of hold on to that nostalgic and that look even more, because the show really is, it's called Cobra Kai, so it's mainly about his I think, character arc. Not to mention, not to say that Ralph Macchio and Danny Russo doesn't have one either, but it's called Cobra Kai, so you got to start at the roots.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of coverage and how important it is in TV. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Are you finding that a common thread or a commonality across the shows that you do for TV, where there's this request for a ton of coverage?
I think earlier on in the shows I was doing, yeah. And it comes from, cause I guess because when you have a guest director come in, because every TV series, if you're doing 10 episodes, you're quite likely going to have 10 different directors. And so every director that comes in, they want to get hired back by the producers that they're working with. And so they don't want to screw them over and not give them lack of coverage. And it really comes down to the producers and showrunners about how they want the aesthetic of the show, or how they feel about coverage and having the ability to change things in post as far as editorial goes. So a lot of directors come in wanting to give the producers everything that they can use as tools in post. But then you get some directors that don't think like that at all and want to, or I guess slightly more auteur about it, and want to shoot exactly what they want to do in the cut and present that to the producers and be like, listen, this is it. This is my work. Hopefully you like it. But in the end, there's always, generally speaking, more coverage than I like to want to do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the benefits of it. What are the benefits of having an enormous amount of coverage, or not even enormous, but just more coverage than you would normally do? What is the advantage to it? And then on the flip side, what is the disadvantage to it from, your standpoint as a cinematographer?
The advantage is that you have more flexibility in post, and that is a valid argument because things change when it gets to post. The feeling in the scene that the actors are giving, all that, a camera movement, it might feel right in the moment when you're shooting it, but once it's in the cut, once it's placed in its kind of its time slot within the program, it might not feel right because previous scenes were maybe too slow or too fast, and so you need to create a certain amount of pacing in order to be entertaining for one, but also to tell a good story. So I do get it. The other side of it is that you do the prep work, you discuss with the director what you want to do, and you try and come up with an idea in your head, at least I do, as far as what the cut will be like and how certain coverage would be necessary or not necessary. And you kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best in a sense. And I prefer that method. I rather cut in camera in a sense. Not that I don't trust the editors, but I feel like I need to tell the story as best as we can in the camera on the day shooting and let post have an easy time. So that's generally my approach. So I don't like to do over coverage if not necessary.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't have time for it. Quite frankly, sometimes the schedules are so crazy that you have to pick and choose your battles too, as far as coverage.
And I can imagine if the coverage is such where you need a second or a third angle, it's going to put some limitations on how you light. For
sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's always a compromise. I'm very familiar with working with two cameras quite often. It's not my first choice, but as far as making days and whatnot, I've gotten used to it. And the third camera is definitely not as fun because you're definitely compromising at some point. But there are ways to, if you're doing a single source lighting setup, for instance, one camera could be doing the side light and another camera could be shooting the backlight. So it can work. It just really depends on the scenario.
Now, Cobra Kai was, I don't know if it was the first or one of the first series to launch YouTube Red, which is now YouTube Premium, and ultimately got bought by Netflix and, is in its third season now, I think, second or third season. Yeah. But at the beginning, it was for specifically, well, let me ask, did you know that this was specifically for YouTube at the beginning?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so knowing that this is kind of to launch a new streaming service in a way, how were there decisions made on your part that supported this idea of knowing that the viewership is going to be on YouTube only?
I want to say for myself, I didn't necessarily take that in consideration, and not in a disrespectful way. It's just any project I come onto, I want to make it the best it can possibly be. I did in the back of my mind think that are there going to be lots of kids just watching on a little handheld monitor like an iPhone or something, which I'm not too excited about. But that didn't make me think that we should change the way we shoot it and have an effect in that sense. Like you can't get too wide because you're not going to see all the elements in the small frame. That didn't affect my decision making or the three guys. Cause I think they always saw it as something more than something that's going to be on a small screen. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it was, I believe, the first program to launch, or maybe the second one. I forgot. There was something else that was out there that I don't think got much fanfare, but certainly this one did. I mean, they had, we shot the first season in 2017, So it's been some time, and when that aired on YouTube, it chalked up 50 million viewers in the first, I think, 6 months or something crazy. So automatically we knew people liked it and it was a hit. But I think that was just for the first 2 episodes because they were for free, right? Mm-hmm. So after that, you had to buy into it. I don't know how much people watched after that. So when Netflix took it over, and it basically had like a second life in a way. Like, I mean, it's crazy to have such a hit round one, and then all of a sudden it finds new life, and it's bigger than it was ever before, which I found hard to believe, but at the same time not, because it is you're reaching out to a bigger demographic. Everyone watches Netflix, and again, who doesn't like Karate Kid? So
that's interesting to hear you say, because I was thinking, and obviously wrong, I was thinking like YouTube is a bigger platform. I'm like, okay, well, YouTube is a bigger platform, so that naturally would be like the best place for this. Even though I think the issue was people didn't necessarily go to YouTube for content like this. You didn't really go there for shows the way that you do Netflix. And it just makes sense to be on Netflix now, and more people can see it. And I think it's a better home, even though YouTube is such a gigantic platform. I think Netflix is still a gigantic platform, but is better suited for that type of content.
Absolutely. And I think that's why YouTube walked away from original content, because they weren't getting in the game. I mean, they have a purpose. We all go on YouTube, but for original kind of more theatrical narrative content, they just couldn't get a foothold, I don't think.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about your approach to lighting for Cobra Kai, and specifically like the way that you dealt with its kind of naturalistic look, because it does feel it feels very natural all the time. Interiors, exteriors, it has a very natural feel. It also has kind of a modern present day feel because it takes place in the present day, but there's a touch of that nostalgia there where you always kind of know you're in the Karate Kid universe, and you can't really put your finger on it. But you talked a lot about lensing and what you chose there, but there has to be some decisions in lighting that got you to that point.
I thank you. I think those are all very complimentary observations. And the approach was, I had to go back and look at my notes, quite honestly, because I've done a few shows in between. But what I struck out to do, and this is all coming through conversations with the showrunners, with the 3 guys, about where the show was going to go, how they wanted to portray Johnny and Daniel. And the theory behind Johnny Lawrence was that he was basically stuck under a rock. Like, no one knew what happened to him. He's kind of been lost in the abyss of the San Fernando Valley, in a sense. So in the lighting approach, I always wanted there to be some sort of hard light, but never, if it was in interior space, it never wanted to hit him. Like, cause he never made it into the spotlight, was the thought. Like, he just wasn't that he never took that path because he got kicked in the face and lost the belt. Right. So he's still suffering from that, metaphorically speaking. And so the lighting, I always want to kind of keep him more in the shadows, never the perfect lighting for him. And again, if there's any hard light for the interior work, that it would be either in the background, just on the side, maybe edging him a little bit, but he was never in the beautiful sunlight of the valley. Take that outside, it's a little bit harder to control when you're doing exterior work. So when we're doing exterior work, I didn't want to soften the light on him. I wanted it to be harsh. Like, this is his harsh reality. He gets beat up every day. Poor Johnny. And so that was kind of the thought process for him. For Daniel and Ralph's work, it was quite the opposite. Like, this is the glory boy. This is the guy that, did the kick and won and got the girl and went on to make 2 more movies. Right. So we tried to, I guess, manicure the light a little bit more for him, and make it nice and soft and kind of like always kind of in the perfect situation if we could. So that was kind of the approach, to kind of give a bit of divide between the 2 characters, as if there isn't one already. So that was the approach there.
You can really feel that. And I think also with, Danny's character, like, you when you first meet him in the first episode, you think like everything is perfect. And you start to peel away the layers and learn more about him as you go. Was there anything from a lighting standpoint that you did as we are learning more about his character?
The honest answer is I can't remember, but I think so. Because that is something I do take in consideration. But it's tough because I rarely go back and watch the work I've shot. So actually, just before this call, I was rewatching the first episode and laughing out loud.
Why?
For some of it. But I just, Billy Zabka did such an amazing job, man. Like, I mean, he's been working off and on over the years. But to get this stage back where he can play this character again, I mean, he did such an exceptional job. The part that I start cracking up on is when he's watching Iron Eagle and he's drinking away his sorrows. It brings me back to the moment when we're shooting it. And he's such a sport, man. Like they both are just incredible. Ralph is just an amazing guy too. So it was fun to revisit that. And actually I'll probably go on to keep watching the rest of it, this weekend, because I do actually miss it. And, it'd be nice to kind of catch up on it. So back to your question, I think we did, but I can't give you any examples.
Well, do you not like watching your work at all? Like, is that just a common thing for you?
Yeah.
Do you even see it on the first airing?
Generally not. No.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I spend so much time with it in prep, and then doing the work over the course of whatever it is, 5 to 14 days, whatever the show might be. And that it's almost like at the end you're purging it in a way, for me. And then I see it in the color session. So I see it again in that aspect. I always ask my directors for their cut because I want to know what, as a team, what did we come up with? What did we complete? And so that I'll always watch and give thoughts on. And then I see a color version of it, usually double speed. and then that's it. Like it's hard to go watch it again. I mean, now I also have a 1-year-old, so it makes it even more hard to go back and watch any sort of footage. But and I imagine going forward it will be too. But yeah, it's not my thing. Once it's in the can, I'm kind of good.
So your perspective on it is unique from the audience's anyway. I mean, like you really, I guess I'm not surprised. I think that happens a lot. I think people don't want to see their work so much, but it feels like we're such a visual medium. You'd want to, but in a way I can see it making sense just to kind of let it go. There's something freeing about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I watch dailies, because that's a learning experience in itself, because you come up with thoughts regarding movements, time when you want to make a move, if it's a handheld, what are you doing? And so that's always a learning experience. And I always recommend that to anybody. When you're shooting, if you can watch your dailies, make sure you watch your dailies, because you learn a lot about the tone you're setting, and if it's going to work, And so once all that information has already been processed in me, like I to see the final product, I generally don't. I mean, it's kind of rare. Yeah. And actually, I kind of take it back at Panavision after we wrapped it, in a Q&A there. And so I saw it again and the cast and crew screen that we had in LA afterwards, which is all great. And it's great to see with an audience too. Like when you can see
that must
your
be fun.
work, especially that kind of work with an audience, and just to hear we watched the first two episodes at the cast and crew, and it was a massive theater at the CAA building. And it was just a great time because you could feed off the energy of the crowd.
I want to transition to your work on 13 Reasons Why. Now, I know you came in at season 2, but you sort of were tasked with creating a new look and vision for it. Tell us about that. Tell us about kind of how you got involved with the show, what you were asked of, and how you did that.
So I was brought into season 2 of 13 Reasons because they were concerned about the way it looks for season 1, and no disrespect to the DP that shot season 1, but it just wasn't what they were looking for. They gravitated towards my reel and saw the work that I do. And I, as we spoke about, Cobra Kai, I have a bit of a more natural approach to my lighting. And so I brought that to season 2 along with a little bit more dramatic lighting, and bringing in some more shadows and such, because it's a bit of a dark show. It's a heavy, it can be a heavy mood on set from time to time. And so I just brought more dramatic to it in a way. I don't want to simplify it, but that was really the result, is that we changed the camera and lenses and the lighting. The gaffer was new to the show. I should say he was the rigging gaffer, but he became the main gaffer. So we kind of changed a lot in order to make it different.
So in a situation like that, you're coming onto a show, it already has a developed look. I guess, how were you approached by them? Did they come to you and just say, we want a fresh start? Or did they have specifics about the direction that they wanted this to go as far as the look?
There was no guidance on direction. It was basically, we wanted a fresh look. And so I think within the first episode or two, I would sit down with the showrunner and just kind of discuss what we were doing, and if we need to modify and modulate those decisions and frames and things like that. And some stuff he wasn't entirely happy with, so we'd have to tell the operators, listen, he doesn't like the lampshade in the back that's lit, so we can't feature those things anymore. So stuff like that. It was challenging for sure, because the showrunner Brian Yorkie has a theatrical background, so he's not used to or familiar with what we do on set and with lighting and camera movement. So it was trying to create an open dialogue all the time about what he was responding to and what he wasn't.
So from, as a cinematographer, this is kind of a unique challenge, because that there are audiences out there that love the show. And the look of a show is so much about what it is that you like when you watch it. Whether you know it or not, it's the look, it's the feel, and you're going in there with a specific goal of changing that. Do you feel like a certain sense of responsibility? Are you nervous about that? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it can be challenging for sure, because you don't want to get it wrong a second time. But I think for me anyways, because I tend to notice those things as a fan of a show. When you're watching, you can tell a slight change, and you look up on IMDb and, oh yeah, like the camera guys, it all changed a bit. But I think, to me, as long as if it's a serial show like that, it's not an anthology, and it's the same actors are back, and you have a bit of the same drama, I think you get lost in it regardless. That's my thought. I think the lighting helps for sure. But if the script isn't good and you're not engaged in the story, then you're going to start noticing the lighting. And you shouldn't. In my opinion, you shouldn't be noticing that stuff. It should be a bit of a magic show in a sense. Like, I don't want you noticing too much of it. Like, I want you to be involved in the story and the characters, and let the photography almost be in the background to a certain degree.
Yeah. So can you describe the changes you made to the second season? Like, what did you set out to do? Like, can you articulate what your goals were, and then also what did you do to achieve those goals?
Honestly, the main thing was contrast, to bring in more contrast to the show. I felt personally that it was season 1 was maybe a slightly flat from time to time, and so that was, to me, the thing that I knew I could create quickly and change quickly in the show. And so that was kind of the primary thing we did. It was just create more contrast, less sources, or hotter sources, depending on the scenarios. Like the school hallway, I had the rigging gaffer turn. Basically, I told him, show me all the lights that you guys used for the hallway. And he did. And I said, okay, let's turn that one off. Let's turn that one off. Let's turn that one off. And just to create more pools and less, and not for it to be as flat. So it was small things like that we did over the course of a lot of those different standing sets and things like that.
So did you kind of go set by set and revamp. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So you did more kind of pulling away than adding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Exactly.
What does that contrast do? Like incorporating more contrast visually, what does that language say to audiences?
I think inherently it just feels more dramatic, right? A less contrasty show is, to me, feels slightly either more comedic or like feels like an old school after school special in a way. And it's a choice, like I'm not saying my choice was necessarily the right way, but it's how I envisioned it and how I saw it. And so I go with that. And it also depends from scene to scene with the stories and the characters. You need to modulate that contrast too. It doesn't always need to be in silhouette or always need to be a side light situation. So in things like Clay's bedroom, I tried to create that more of into a single source situation with light just coming in through the windows of the house and less fill light. So there's little things like that you kind of take away. And to me, the material is dark enough as it is, but I felt the image should also kind of be in that wheelhouse too.
Yeah, and I think you definitely see that as the story progresses, for sure. And there's something about contrast that makes you almost wonder more about the character. Like you want to know, you want to learn more about them. What is in that shadow side that you can't see? That type of stuff, I think, lends itself to the storytelling as well.
Right, and where are these people hiding? Because that's a lot about the show too. Is everyone's got their secrets, and so I think that helped in that regard as well.
Did you change your camera and lens package from season 1 to season 2? I mean, I know you weren't involved in season 1, but were you making those changes as well?
Yeah, that was actually the first time that I used the Panavision DXL 2 camera. Actually, sorry, it was a DXL. The 2 came out later. And I think we were one of the first shows that used it. It's their large sensor camera. And so that was, we changed camera rental houses and everything. I used Panavision quite a bit. So that was also a bit of a learning curve too, to shoot a show with a large sensor, because we're dealing with more information, different optics, different ways that the eye sees the image in a way, because you're taking I'm not the techie guy. I'm definitely the creative, intuitive guy. So when you're losing, so I won't be, I can't speak verbatim to the information I've been given by Panavision on this, but when you're using a large sensor, the optics, it's almost more like the real eye sees as far as how objects are in distances to the lens. And so you get a bit more out of it in that sense. And also your fall off focus wise is much more extreme too. So in order to create a shallower depth, you don't have to do much about it. You could shoot a 2 or 2.8 and still get that fall off that you would get shooting wide open or at a 1.4, let's say, or a 2 on 35.
I haven't had much experience with that camera, and I hear it occasionally on Go Creative Show. I mean, usually you hear Alexa's, you've been hearing, Venice quite a bit now. There's been a few here and there that talk about the, is it DXL? Am I saying that right?
Correct, yeah.
So I've heard that a few times on the show. Did you test any other cameras before ultimately choosing that Panasonic or Panavision?
I did. I tested I shot side by side with the Alexa. Yeah. But I preferred the separation that I got from the larger sensor. And I felt that was also key for the kids and their storytelling.
Why?
Because so many of them feel isolated, like there are so many clicks and and there's so much, bowling to a certain degree, that I wanted to have that ability to isolate characters within a frame in an environment. And also we shot flashbacks in anamorphic lenses. So all the present day material was spherical. That's something that we did adopt from season 1, which I was excited about because I love shooting anamorphic. So, and what the large sensor did with the anamorphic lenses, that we basically were able to shoot the entire offerings of the anamorphic lenses. We weren't cropping that you get when you're shooting with an Alexa or other cameras that aren't large sensor like that. So we were shooting basically true anamorphic 2:1. And that was also the aspect ratio I changed too. They shot 1:7:8 season 1, and I pushed for the 2:1 aspect ratio just to make it more cinematic.
What did you love about having that anamorphic in the flashbacks and comparing that to, this kind of isolated feel and look of the present day?
I think there's an inherent quality to anamorphic, which I think is why it's so popular right now. I mean, you look at any film from the 70s and 80s through to the 90s, it's like the epic films are anamorphic, like all the Clint Eastwood Westerns are mostly anamorphic. So there's just this inherent quality to it, especially in a close-up, that you just feel this, I think to me it's a visceral like kind of energy to it that is unique, and you don't get it in any still photography. It's only in the cinematography that you can use these anamorphic lenses. And so to me, it just screams cinematic immediately. And the bokeh fall off you get from it too, with the elliptical out of focus specular highlights they're super tasty. So it's something that just, I think as soon as you project an image on anything with those, you cannot help but love them. And to me, they're overused now. Like a commercial, a Jack in the Box commercial is using them, So it's kind of gotten, I think, away from what we all loved it for. But I can't fault cinematographers for wanting to use them all the time because they're beautiful.
I want to transition to your work on Preacher.
Sure.
Talk to me about the visual aesthetic of this show. Now, looking through this show in preparation for our interview, it's like you got to play with so much with this show. There's so much color in there, and just there's a lot of scenes that are like completely in focus. So like very deep focus, lots of great color, really strong grades in some of the scenes, and it just seems like such a fun show to be part of. Can you talk to us about, first of all, what is the show about, and your approach to the visuals?
So the show is about a preacher that is kind of slightly lost, but also in search of God to get answers, right? And it goes beyond that. It's layered and layered and layered, and the writer Sam did an incredible job. His background came from Breaking Bad, so the storytelling is just phenomenal. So the show is charactered by Dominic Cooper, Ruth Negga, and Joe Gilgon, who's just an incredibly talented and funny individual, and makes the whole set crack up to no end. Like he's got what do you call it? Diarrhea of the mouth to a certain extent. Like it's just insane though. Like, but it all makes sense. And it's like his brain is just spewing. It's just amazing. Anyways, it's based on a graphic novel from not too long ago, like the 90s, about a preacher in search of God. And he gets the voice of God essentially called Genesis that's kind of stuck within him. And he's the only one that can use it, but people are trying to get it from him. And then chaos ensues. I didn't start the show. And a colleague of mine, John Grillo, lends the first season, and he set the look. I should go back. An old boss of mine, Bill Pope, who I was a film loader for on Team America, he shot the pilot. And so he set the initial look, and then John Grillo came on, continued to look, and then obviously over the course of 3 seasons, kept it going and expanded it. I first shot an episode in season 3 for John Grillo when he got the opportunity to direct. So the cinematographer, a colleague and friend of mine, got the opportunity to direct, and he asked me to shoot it for him. And I came down and shot the first episode that he directed, which then parlayed into me shooting season 4 because he went on to do other work. So I shot season 4 in Australia. And so from that perspective, it was a completely new crew. I was the only face that the actors recognized, and I still wasn't, totally familiar to them in a sense, right? Because we worked for 8 days the year prior. So what I was excited about in taking on that show was that it is super colorful. It's all the things you mentioned. But that being in a new location meant that I could also affect the look of the show. I wasn't inheriting sets. So that was something I was really drawn to, aside from the subject and the show itself, because it's a wonderful show. But as an artist, I want to be able to put to it what I can. And so with it being, again, like it's a road show. So with it being a totally new location, I knew that I would have the opportunity to do that. And the actors are wonderful too. So
what was the location that you had in your season?
We were shooting in Australia for Texas and Australia and Masada, which is, the Middle East area. So
what does that what does that give you? What you think of those three locations and you're thinking what?
Well, Masada was interesting because it's a harsh desert environment, but they're basically inside a cave. So there's not a whole lot of natural sunlight that is seen in it, except for in Airstar's office. So that was became its own challenge in a way. Like, how do you create light and lighting naturally inside a cave? I mean, we obviously had fixtures of certain sorts, but in order to create an ambient light, we need kind of some sort of vibe. And I'm always motivated by light. I don't want to just always create something for the sake of it. Albeit, I think that kind of show you could, because it's a comic, but I still want to kind of stick to my natural aesthetics as far as how I think about a show. And so we tested gelled lights and tried to figure out what I came to call with my gaffer, the cave color, which became a blue. I think we called it cave blue or something. It was, I forgot what the Roscoe gel number was on it, but because we tested so many, as long as Carl, my gaffer, knew what it was, then all I would have to say is that, Carl, we need cave blue over here. Yeah. And he would show up with it. So that's how technical I get. And so that was fun. And then we had an amazing production designer that created just amazing sets, whether they're on stage for the Masada stuff or on location using trailers that he put together and came up with this idea for a diner, and which was still, to me, one of my favorite scenes, just because it feels Americana, but it's Americana somewhere else in the world. It's in Australia. And so that was a lot of fun. And again, I used the DXL camera for that. So we were a large sensor, beautiful lenses that Dan Sasaki had tweaked. And so yeah, like that show, we had so many different locations, man. We were out in locations where Mad Max was shot in first Mad Max. Yeah, it was really cool. We were in places where you'd go in a tech scout and there'd be 100 kangaroo just flying across the road at any moment. Like, it's just, people in Australia, it's not new to them, right? But you take in these directors from the States that came over to shoot, and everyone was out their phones taking pictures of the kangaroos.
Yeah.
And so their scenery, their terrain, and the light is different down there too. It's in Southern Hemisphere, so there's just so much freshness to me about it that I was inspired, and I feel like I did some of my best work down there for sure.
Can you describe the quality of light in Australia, how it differs?
It differs in the sense that it can be harsher for sure. Like on a clear day, you can feel what is kind of the slight absence of the ozone down there. And I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, but I'm almost certain that it's a little bit thinner down there because they're real big pushers of sunblock down there. They have a whole cancer council down there, and lubing up with sunblock is something that everybody does because it is harsh. But it doesn't come off that way necessarily. And we were there in their summertime. It was hot as F down there when we first got there. Really? I mean, it was brutal. And it was a dry season too, which they've been having lately. So the sun is intense. You think it's intense in California or places here in the South. It was even more so there. But the quality of it it was interesting because it would be crisp, but then you would have these like inversion layers where like the lighting would just be so soft and magical, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's vistas galore. I don't know. I felt it was similar to months before I was in South Africa shooting in the Southern Hemisphere too, and it wasn't unlike that as well. Where there's, it's hard. Honestly, I wish I could kind of pinpoint the quality of it a bit more, or why it's like that. But there is a major difference coming from the Northern Hemisphere to the Southern Hemisphere as far as how the sun hits the Earth, and I found it to be pretty cool.
Well, something I noticed in the show is your use of really deep focus in some of these scenes. Like, there's something I love about that. We had somebody on. Oh, it's going to kill me. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it, because we had somebody on recently talking about deep focus, and on their show, I'm scrolling through my website at gocreativeshow.com. Let's see. It was an HBO show. Oh my God. Oh, The Plot Against America. That was it, with Martin Algren. So, all right, The Plot Against America on HBO, I think it was. Regardless, we talked in depth about this idea of deep focus and how, when used effectively, like, it can be so great. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because I think you did it masterfully in Preacher. And it's like the challenges that we identified in the last time I spoke about this was that, yes, you give the viewer's eye a lot to look at, but in your blocking and your lighting and your camera movement, you like, the challenge for him, and I'm curious if you feel the same way, was the fun of it was to, how do you direct the eye when everything's in focus exactly where you want to go? It was sort of like a new challenge for a cinematographer. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, the use of deep focus, why you did it, and how did that change the way that you lit and shot?
That's a very, very good question. In achieving it, there's two ways that we did on Preacher, and one is by the stop on the lens, and the other one is by using split diopters in order to keep foreground focus and background focus. And that was something that was adopted from John Grillo's time on Preacher. So I wanted to keep that going as well. So we use split diopters quite a bit. But to answer your question about how you direct the attention of the audience to a specific area, because everything's in focus, I think it comes down to a lot of factors. It comes down to art department, production design, the lighting. All those things can affect the frame and where you're looking. You know, are you looking towards the vanishing point? Are you looking towards a justified position on left or right of the frame? And how do you create it there? So I think there's a lot of elements that can do that, and the staging of actors too, right? Someone could be big in frame, and someone could be a little bit further out, like an old spaghetti western. So I think using those kinds of perspectives too can help direct the eye. And sometimes it's not easy. I mean, whether we achieved it well all the time or not, I can't say, because I haven't gone back and watched it.
That's right. You never watch your work.
I think it comes down to too, like the working with your director, and like dialoguing about, like, hey, where are you looking right now? Like, are you looking? What part of the frame are you focused on? And is that the right spot? If it's not, then we need to change it. So there's not like a recipe for it necessarily. But you also look at great paintings from great artists, and that can help too. There's the reason why I try and go to the Norton Simon Museum here in LA and stare at paintings from time to time, just to see how they did it. And hopefully you can adopt that to your work osmosisly or somehow.
Talk to me about this split diopter and what it actually does. What does it let you do as a cinematographer?
It allows you to keep something that's in the background in focus. That's where you lay your focus on the lens, and then there's different layers of split diopters, 3, 2, and 1, and they all have different powers. And so it becomes an experiment as far as how it's going to work. Like your microphone, for instance, if that was further away from your further away from your face, and you want to keep your face and the microphone in focus, you would have to kind of figure out the distance that the microphone is at and the diopter that's right for it. And so what will happen is that you end up keeping both elements in focus. So like imagine something like that, and then when it's turned this way, they're going to both be sharp. So it's all fine tuning it. There literally is a diopter. So and unfortunately, it's actually not a split, but it is a diopter. So you get the idea. So if I do something like this, imagine half of it's there, half of it's not. But if it's so close to the lens, you're not going to see that blurry section necessarily, or you find a place to hide it.
Yeah.
And so diopters are a great tool to use in order to affect the image.
And you look at some stills of just people, using split diopters. I mean, in one of the scenes in Jaws, like one of the most famous scenes, they don't even shy away from the blurry edge. Like you have focus, a blurred edge, and then in focus. And it gives you kind of this really surreal look. I mean, obviously the goal was for it to feel and look surreal, but I think what I saw, at least what I was getting from Preacher, is that you didn't really get that blurred edge so much. It felt just more like everything was in focus.
Right. Yeah. I think that generally the idea was to hide the edge if we could. Yeah.
What are some of the techniques to hide that edge?
Props, background, finding, depending on how you have that diopter, that split portion, that half portion, if it's at an angle, then it can be a little more challenging. If it's up and down, you can hide it in a door frame. Right. It becomes challenging. But something like you said, like in Jaws, it's obvious and you see it. So, sometimes you got to let it go and hopefully the audience doesn't sit on it too long to think, or if they do, who cares? It's all suspension of disbelief anyways.
Yeah. If any of you guys listening or watching have experience with these, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because it's something I want to experiment with. It seems like a really fun tool, but there's so many situations where I'll be shooting something and I'm like, you'll put it in focus and you'll realize, oh my God, we just don't have the set design to fill all of these gaps. And it's just so easy to just blur it. Clients love it. Yeah. It looks beautiful. You know exactly where to look. I think there's such a temptation to isolate your talent and blur everything out. And I think it's a unique and interesting challenge to kind of let everything be in focus and see what you can get out of that.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to aesthetics and styles, in our contemporary lives right now. Like it happens to be that kind of vibe. People want things out of focus more and a shallow depth of field, and everyone shoots wide open, and it seems to be a trend, and it's a beautiful look, and it works for a lot of stuff. But I'm also drawn towards the extreme depth of field, and I'm looking for I'd love to do a project that is. Everything's in focus, like a noir, think Orson Welles, like Touch of Evil or something, or Citizen Kane. It's just everything's in focus. I would love to do something like that.
Oh, that would
because
be
you're using different, you're using different tools. Like you said, like how do you create the viewer's eye to a certain spot without using the easy way of defocusing it?
Yeah. In our last few minutes, just curious, what are you excited about right now? I mean, Hollywood is kind of at a standstill during COVID. I mean, some shows are still going on. Certainly some movies are shooting, but for the most part, the entertainment industry is kind of slowed to a crawl, if not stopped in some locations. What are you seeing in your industry? You're in Los Angeles, right? Is that where you live?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you seeing? What's the vibe out there? How are people dealing with this?
It's unnerving, And let me switch over because my earbuds are actually dying. So I'm going to go to my laptop audio.
Okay.
Sorry, buddy. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a unnerving time for sure as far as the industry right now. I talk to quite a bit of my colleagues each day about their shows, and one of my friends' shows just shut down. Because someone in, I think, makeup got COVID. I also think it's the safest industry right now, because I'm starting a job Monday, actually, where we get tested 3 times a week. So I don't know a whole lot of industries that are being tested that often or at all, right? I mean, there's so many jobs and people out there that don't get the ability to get tested. So the fact that they test us 3 times a week makes me feel a little bit better about it. I know the PPP stuff, PPE, is troublesome. I mean, we work in an industry that's very social. I mean, it's people on set stand next to you all the time to talk, and it's a cool thing to do, and it's an amazing industry that we're in. But to take that away, it's going to be challenging and a bit odd. So I'll be able to elaborate more in a couple of weeks for you. But I'm excited to get back to work. I've been off for a bit, and I need to get back to the craft I love doing. And it's just going to be a different way that we operate until there's a vaccine that is effective.
Yep. I wish you the best with this new project. Can you tell us the name, anything about it?
Sure. It's Dead to Me Season 3.
Oh, great. So,
yes, the Netflix dark comedy with Christina Applegate and Linda Cardellini.
Oh, excellent. But I'm so glad to see you guys out there working again. It's just so encouraging to see the resilience of this industry and continuing on. Like especially with quarantines, the value of television is just, it's just so important to have great stories to watch. It really is. Great stories to tell, great stories to watch. So we're so thankful that you guys are out there working through this.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's something that in regards to how they do the protocol, that I think if there is another shutdown, that we might still be working, just because it's been closed for so long and so many people have been suffering financially. But again, what you said, like, it's an outlet for people that are staying at home. They need the content. I mean, it's an industry that doesn't suffer during recessions. It's always strong, even during recessions. So this is the only time, besides a strike, that we've been shut down this long.
Yeah. Well, Cameron Duncan, director of photography, definitely check out his work, CameronDuncan.net. There's so much other stuff here we didn't even get a chance to talk about, but go to the website, look at his work. Anything else you want to promote, Cameron, on Instagram, Twitter, anything like that?
I have an Instagram account. I don't twit. I don't Facebook, but yeah, not much else. I'm low on words and big on images.
Well, that's perfect for Instagram.
That's why I probably love it so much.
Is it just your name, Cameron Duncan?
I think it's Camerones.
Camerones.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
We're going to put a link to it in the show notes so you guys can check it out. But cool. Do go to CameronDuncan.net and check out his work. And Cameron, thank you so much for being on Go Creative Show.
Ben, thanks for having me, man. It's been a pleasure. It's been a real blast. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. I want to thank Cameron Duncan for coming on Go Creative Show and sharing his experiences with all of us. I also want to thank Connor Crosby for producing the show. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. And of course, Matt Russell over at gainstructure.com for mixing, mastering, and making the show sound so good. His team can be found at gainstructure.com, and they certainly work for us at Go Creative Show. They do all of my audio work at BC Media Productions, and you can hire them too for your own projects over at gainstructure.com. Of course, follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. I also want to thank our sponsor, MZ Education for Creatives. And of course, we want to thank all of you out there for listening and supporting the show all these years. The show notes from today's episode and all other episodes are at gocreativeshow.com. And of course, we will see you next week on another episode of Go Creative Show, podcast for filmmakers.